Hello and welcome to episode 166 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. On today's show, I'm joined by Leet, who is known on Twitter as Meet and Leet. He has gone to all of the Disney parks throughout the world, and he will talk about all of the international parks in our conversation. Before we get started, make sure to head to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Like, comment, and subscribe because it will only take 30 seconds, but it will really mean the world to us. Now, let's welcome Leet to the podcast. Thanks for being here, Leet.
No worries. Happy to be here.
So you have the distinction of being at all 6 Disney resorts throughout the world, including,
Right.
what is it? Oh, boy. So there's 4 at Walt Disney World, 2, that's 6. 7, 8, 12 parks
12.
throughout the world. Okay, yeah. I wanted to make sure I got that right. So I'm going to start first with Disneyland Paris, and I want to talk about this because one thing about anybody who follows you knows this, you love to get the meet and greets. So we're going to talk about the parks in general, but I would like to talk about how they are with meet and greets and what types of characters you're going to see at all of these parks. So when we talk about Disneyland Paris, what are some of the differences that you notice right away from the U.S. parks?
Sure. Disneyland Paris is the only park that I've been to where characters will sign in a language that's not English, which is pretty interesting. Mickey is not going to sign in like any Japanese or Chinese characters internationally, but like characters like Goofy, his name is Dingo in French. So depending on how you interact with the characters is how they'll sign. If you'd like them to sign in a language that you're not speaking, you can always ask them, which is really cool. And Paris is also the only park I've ever been to where characters will also speak a different language. So we went to a private event where they had Roger Rabbit and Eddie Valiant meeting, and Eddie Valiant only spoke French. So it was definitely an interesting interaction. And you've also might have seen on the internet of like characters having accents that might not match the character themselves, which is pretty interesting. I do know that there are instances of some characters speaking Chinese in Shanghai, like Mulan, Raya, and sometimes Jasmine, but for the most part, everyone else gets their characters from English-speaking places. But Paris does allow them to speak French and things like that.
So I want to talk about that special event where you got Roger Rabbit and Eddie Valiant. Sure. What was this event? That sounds amazing.
They did it in, I think it was September or October of 2018, and they did it again in 19 in the following spring. It was called Disney Loves Jazz, and it was like the park had, the Studios Park had like some different jazz acts across the park where you could like sit down and enjoy some jazz music. I think they added a bunch of meet and greets at the last minute because people weren't buying tickets, and then suddenly it was sold out and it became more of a character event. And they also had the Aristocats, all 3 of them. This was also the event where Edgar Balthazar from the Aristocats, the villain, that was the first event he'd ever been at, which was really cool. And that was also one of the first times that Hortensia, Oswald's girlfriend, had ever met. It was a lot of fun. It was a fun event.
That's amazing. Now, I know one of the things that I have heard, I haven't had the chance to be over there yet and experience Disneyland Paris, but there's definitely the reputation that the Disney Studios park there is the worst Disney theme park in the world. I want to know, like, this isn't, like, there's no such thing as bad pizza, right? There's a worst pizza, but there's not bad pizza, right?
Right.
So this is not saying that it is a bad theme park, but would you agree that they need to do a lot more at studios to bring it up to the other level of the other parks?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's just even if you do everything in the park, even on a crowded day, you're going to be able to do it pretty easily before the park closes. There's just not a lot of things to do in it. They've made some efforts with Avengers Campus, and they're obviously building a lot more. The good thing is that all the tickets at Disneyland Paris are park hoppers, so you're not going to find a 95 euro ticket that just includes Disney Studios. Think of it as like an extra add-on to Disneyland. It kind of swallows the pill a little easier. But yeah, there's really just not a lot to do. There wasn't before, and there isn't now. We went recently last October, And I swear to God, we were there for 2 hours between all the things that they have. Not even 2 hours, maybe 1 hour between like all the things that already exist in other parks, like a lot of the things they have here. The only thing that we really felt the need to do was Crush's coaster and the Rock and Roller Coaster that they turned into the Avengers ride. Everything else is pretty standard and nothing special. They do have some really cool shows depending on when you go. But when we were there, none of them were on. That's really it.
So I don't know what time of year you experienced Disneyland Paris, but one of the unique things about that resort in particular is that you can actually see a Disney park in the snow and you get some colder weather. Did you experience any of that, or did you only visit in the summer?
The coldest I've gone was around October for Halloween, and it was, I don't know why I thought it wouldn't be cold, but it certainly was the coldest I had ever been in a Disney theme park. It wasn't quite snowing, but it was definitely like in the like 40s maybe, and it was pretty chilly, but definitely wasn't snowing. We went to Efteling in the Netherlands during the snow, and that was a lot of fun. But I don't know if I'd want to go to Disneyland in the snow.
So my favorite Disney ride is Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, and I know at some point I have to experience the version in Disneyland Paris because it is a whole nother level. Like if you've done the two in the United States, they're fun, but why don't you talk about the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland Paris and how this thing is just top shelf?
Yeah, so like the part where like you go under the rivers of the far west, I think is what it's called there, and you go up into the mountain. It's like really cool. It's like really cavernous with like the bats, and it's just super long because you got to go under the river. And I don't know, it's really cool. There's like a really cool water effect. I think it takes your picture in a portion. I don't know if it still does that. I know it did at one point. And it's definitely like also like one of the longest lines in the resort. Like I know here and especially Disneyland, like you can usually get on Thunder Mountain pretty reasonably, but it takes a while over there because it's really cool. And it's also like just in a perfect spot. So anywhere you go around Frontierland, you can see it and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, anybody who doesn't know, instead of having Tom Sawyer Island on the other side of the river, they have the ride apparatus for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. And you get onto the ride, you wait in line and start and finish the ride on the other side of the river, and it shoots you under twice throughout this ride, which is a really, really cool effect and something that I really wish they would have thought of to do over here, because I don't think a lot of people really take advantage of Tom Sawyer Island, in the US very often. So that's just another cool little side thing about Disneyland Paris. When this first opened, this park over there, and they definitely struggled, they have really put a lot of resources into Disneyland Paris to try to bring it up to the standards of the other parks, and I think they've done a really good job. One of the places where I think they excel is their Tomorrowland does not have the same problem as the Tomorrowlands in Walt Disney World and Disneyland in the US. So why don't you talk about their Tomorrowland and the really cool idea they had over there?
Yeah, so it's also like really sad like at this point because I know a lot of the Jules Verne theming is like either on its way out or they're changing it to other things, but like you can still see a lot of the reminiscence with all like the gold and like the steampunk vibe, which is interesting because like steampunk kind of came back in like the 2010s ish. A lot of people love that steampunk era of and like style, but it's definitely like changing nowadays. Like they had a really cool Space Mountain, and now it's a Star Wars Space Mountain, which is really cool. But it's definitely not the cool, like it doesn't necessarily match up all the way with the exterior. Like the exterior is still like the rivets and bolts and the gold and the Jules Verne, but you go inside and in the ride and it's like, George Lucas and the John Williams soundtrack, and then with Star Tours behind it as well. It's definitely an interesting combo, but it's a really cool area. Like there's like a lot of the music's really interesting. The fountains are really cool. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's really cool.
What would be one piece of advice that you would give to somebody going from the US to Disneyland Paris if this was their first international park that they were experiencing?
I definitely recommend anytime you go to anywhere internationally, just make sure you do enough research for different cultural norms. There will be different things you might expect that wouldn't happen in the US, like smoking's a little more common, even if it's not allowed everywhere. It's definitely going to happen. You're also not going to see the level of like guest relations that you'd see in the US. So if you're having an issue with like Disney Premier access, you might not receive a cast member that's going to guide you through it. So it might be a good idea to make sure that it works beforehand before you get there. And then I always just recommend buying your tickets in advance. I would never recommend buying them at the gate, especially with reservations. It's definitely, they're not the most willing to help you. I know when we went, there's no way for them to, until a couple months ago, there was no way for them to verify that you had a theme park reservation besides someone literally looking at your ticket with their hand and like reading it. So like you had to like funnel into this tiny little checkpoint where there was two cast members checking it, because all their ticket booth, all their like turnstiles are automatic. There's no cast members there to help you out. So just things like that I'd recommend looking at. And also transportation. All the international parks are usually connected by public transit, which isn't something that they do here. So like the parks will close at a certain time to make sure that you have enough time to get back home on the metro, things like that. So making sure that you don't stay too late at Disney Village to make sure you can get back to wherever you're staying, whether it's in the city of Paris or nearby or at a Disney resort. Something to keep in mind.
So heading over to Japan, and I want to get to DisneySea as its own thing, because I think this is going to be a super long conversation between us, because everybody knows or has heard at least the stories of that one. But Tokyo Disneyland itself as a park, what are some of the differences there and some of the similarities? Like, I believe they have the same castle as they have at Magic Kingdom. It's the same Cinderella castle.
Right.
So is that sort of weird to see the same castle at the end of a completely different main street?
Yeah, it's weird that you fly in a plane for depending on where you come from or where you came, it could be up to a whole day's worth of travel to get there, and then you arrive at the castle that you live 10 minutes from. It's definitely a little jarring. But I guess like the best part of Tokyo Disneyland is that it's a combination of Magic Kingdom and Disneyland, and then if you combine them together in the 80s, because there's a lot of just architectural things and that still are kind of stuck in the 80s. You can kind of see like their Tomorrowland. As of right now, is kind of similar to the Tomorrowland at Magic Kingdom if it never changed. There's also like the way that World Bazaar is set up. It kind of reminds you of like a little 80s vibe. And there's just some things that are old too. Like they have the old Dumbo that they haven't updated with the disco ball, which is weird because it's like right next to the brand new Beauty and the Beast ride. So it's like a collection of all the best parts of the American parts with a little newer things added here and there.
Did you get to experience that new Beauty and the Beast ride?
No, when we were there, it was right after they got rid of the Star Jet, so they were still building that.
Okay, because I have seen that ride, and man, that looks like a whole nother level of Disney ride.
I'm excited to try it out sometime soon.
I hope some of those, especially the animatronics they use, start coming to some of the U.S. parks. I think with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, it looks like Tiana and some of those characters are more in that mold than they are of the projections on the face, like in Frozen Ever After.
Yeah, looks like they're moving more towards that than the projected faces, because they even did it for the Frozen ride in Hong Kong too.
So what are some of the rides that you can expect that are similar in Tokyo Disneyland? Are we looking at Peter Pan? Are we looking at some of those kind of rides, or is it completely different?
So like a lot of the rides are very similar. Like your Pirates is exactly like the Disneyland version with like a minor differences. Their Haunted Mansion is just like ours before they redid it with like, I remember like they added those stairs and there used to be spiders. They never updated the Tokyo one. They do get Haunted Mansion Holiday. So if you ever wanted to see our Haunted Mansion with Haunted Mansion Holiday, check it out the later half of the year. Big Thunder Mountain's pretty standard. It's like just like ours. Their Splash Mountain is a little different than what we used to have. They have like their Toontown is identical for the most part to Disneyland. They added some extra stuff pretty recently. They added a new mini meet and greet. Like their Buzz Lightyear is identical to Disneyland. The only thing that really screams differences is their Pooh ride, the Monsters Inc. ride, which no one has, and then the Beauty and the Beast ride. Everything else is pretty. If you've done it here, you've done it there. It might, depending on the ride, it might be in a different language, but some of it might not be. Like their Pirates is all in English. I didn't do Haunted Mansion because it was closed when we were over there. Their Small World is just like ours with Disney characters.
So some of the rides do speak Japanese over there?
Yeah, like I know, like with like Pirates, it was pretty much the same thing in English. But I know, like I remember Splash Mountain was in Japanese. I think the Monsters ride was. I'm pretty sure Pooh was. Roger Rabbit was for the depending on the ride, but yeah, a lot of some of it was half and half. Like their Country Bears, like a Big Al would sing one verse in English and then would sing one verse in Japanese. So it just depends the attraction. But yeah,
So do you speak any of these other languages, or are you kind of stuck having to communicate in English, and how difficult is that if you are speaking all English?
So I will say for the international Disneys, it's pretty easy to get around the Disney within the Disney bubble with just speaking English. There might be some like you need something specific, like if you need to like if you like have an allergy, that might be hard to like communicate. But like for things like how many in your party, like make sure you sit down, like the parade's at this time, you could pretty much get around pretty easily just speaking English.
And what are the meet and greets like in Tokyo?
So Tokyo has like two specific groups. There's like queued meet and greets, and there's very few of those because the lines get pretty long, and they're pretty strict about how many pictures you take in Tokyo. So like if you're in line for an hour to meet Duffy, they're only like gonna let you take 3 pictures with Duffy. But like a lot of the characters in Tokyo will just roam. As someone who is not Japanese and doesn't appear Japanese, those characters are more willing to pick you because they just you stick out. Especially the face characters, because all the face characters speak English. They kind of want to meet Americans, so they definitely will pick you by default, so they can like actually interact in the language that they speak, which is really cool. And they also just have some insane characters there all the time. Like you can find the Caballeros there pretty much every day. Clarice, the Aristocats, who else? Esmeralda. Some ones you can't usually find in the U.S., which is pretty cool.
And it would be really, really hard, I think, for somebody who only goes to the US parks to understand exactly how big of a deal Duffy is over there and how he is almost like the biggest character in the Asian parks. So why don't you talk about Duffy and like this cult that he seems to have over there?
In Tokyo, it's weird because Tokyo only has Duffy and DisneySea. There's no Duffy merchandise at Disneyland. It's all in DisneySea. But there's like, it's like Duffy just threw up all over the park. There's like everyone has something, whether it's like a full size plush or like some keychains or a little bag they carry around. The park also has like little stations that are like set up so you can put your Duffy or your Shelly May or whoever and like take a picture of them with a cool view. There's opportunities. Really, Tokyo really only has meet and greets with Duffy and Shelly May, but there's plenty of opportunities to see them on stage shows or in like shows in the lagoon. And there's just so many stores to like buy the different merchandise. And because of all the seasonal events, the merchandise changes out. So you can get your Duffy in a Halloween costume or in a Christmas costume or in a nice kimono during cherry blossom season. So it just depends on when you go, depending on which Duffy merch you can purchase.
And I think it is almost universal that if somebody has gone to Tokyo DisneySea, it is their favorite Disney park. So this is a park that not a lot of us are going to get the chance to experience. So as somebody who has experienced it, tell everybody what they're missing, because this is next level theming at Tokyo DisneySea.
Yeah, because DisneySea is like one of those places where like your jaw just drops everywhere you go. It's also just really big. Like I don't know scale wise like what to compare it to because I've never like taken a ruler, but like it's physically like if you go from the front of the park to the back, even before they added Fantasy Springs, it takes a while. Like there's just so many different ways to traverse the park, many different paths, and the lagoons make it so much bigger. And just everywhere you look, there's like it's immersive. Like you're not going to see a corner of a building. You're not going to see like the wrong land in the wrong place. Everything just transitions really well. Like there's this weird area in between Mysterious Island and like the mermaid area where there's like a waterfall and this little grotto and there's like this huge rockwork and it's this really small area that really doesn't need all that, but it's just amazing just how much theming there is in this little corner. So it's just really cool. It's amazing. And they have all the rides that are pretty cool too.
Well, and the rides at Tokyo DisneySea are not carbon copies like over at Tokyo Disneyland. So
Yeah.
you are getting rides that a lot of people wouldn't even associate with Disney, like Journey to the Center of the Earth and some of those
Right.
things. So what are their rides like there? Are they thrill rides? Are they, regular dark rides like we
Sure.
have in the US? Or is it a nice combination of both?
There's definitely like something for everyone, I'd say. Like the Nemo and Friends Sea Rider is pretty close to Star Tours with a Nemo theme. They have like a roller coaster in the back, Raging Spirits, which is the same coaster as the one in Disneyland Paris. There's like a nice boat ride, which is kind of like It's a Small World, the Sinbad ride, which is pretty cool. It's really long. Like I didn't really expect it to be like it just kept going and it kept going. You never knew when you'd like go to a new scene. You'd be like, "This is the end," because it was so cool. And it's like, no. Then there's another scene that's even bigger. Um, there's also I think my favorite ride, which I wasn't expecting, was the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ride, which is it's not a proper submarine like the Nemo ride. It's kind of like Peter Pan in a bubble. They kind of put like bubble effects so it looks like you're underwater, and it's just really cool floating through those different scenes. There's some things that are familiar, like Indiana Jones is pretty similar to one at Disneyland. Tower Terror is familiar-ish, even if it's in a different box. We didn't do Toy Story because we heard Toy Story is like almost the same thing once you get inside. And then there's like Turtle Talk is in a really cool area. So there's some familiar things, but all the really cool stuff is all the new stuff, all the intricate stuff.
Amazing. And then would you say that is your favorite Disney park, or do you have a different one?
I would still say Disneyland is my favorite park, just because it's it's one of my favorite places on the planet.
You can't repeat nostalgia, right?
Yeah, it's the nostalgia goggles. If I didn't grow up going to Disneyland, I wouldn't say that, but Tigger Disney's definitely number 2.
So then let's talk about the other 2 parks very quickly. We have Hong Kong Disneyland, and this was a park that when they opened it, they realized they just didn't have enough. So they have had to almost go back and just redo that entire park. What did you think about Hong Kong Disneyland, and did you find that it felt sort of incomplete?
I think we did everything in Hong Kong Disneyland before launch that we needed. That we were like, and we didn't do like the Pooh ride because it's the same as here, but it's definitely underbuilt and underdeveloped. What I liked about it is that I had enough time to meet every character that I wanted to in that park without like having to worry about missing things, because there's just not a whole lot to do in Hong Kong Disneyland. And it's also because it's so small, there's definitely not a lot of crowds either. So even rides that would have long lines, like even like their Space Mountain or like Big Grizzly mine cars, the lines aren't very long either because there's just not a lot of things to do. But I still enjoyed it. And that's another park where Duffy has also taken over too. So there's a lot of Duffy there too.
What are their meet and greets like there? Do you have to know Cantonese, or can you really get away with just speaking English? And do they have a lot of meet and greets to make up for the lack of rides?
Yeah, so it wasn't, so when we went, it wasn't like this, but now there's like you can meet all the Duffy friends, there's all the Mickey friends, there's some other characters like Esmeralda's there, all the princesses are there every day. Hong Kong is pretty, because of just the way that Hong Kong works, you can pretty much get away with just speaking English in Hong Kong, which is really nice. So everyone's going to understand what you're saying pretty easily, which is good. But there's also now Marvel characters. There weren't any Marvel characters when we went. So there's definitely a pretty wide variety of every Disney character you can imagine there too.
And then heading over to the newest Disney park, and that would be Shanghai Disneyland. And there are a lot of really technologically advanced rides that you can find at Shanghai Disneyland. I know that now a lot of people in the US have had the chance to experience Tron, but that ride started off in Shanghai Disneyland. And I think whereas Disneyland Paris has the best version of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, if you take off the nostalgia glasses for Pirates of the Caribbean, I think you have to admit that Pirates of the Caribbean at Shanghai Disneyland is just next level.
Yeah, so I didn't know anything. We went to Shanghai maybe a month or two after they opened, so there wasn't really a lot of videos. I didn't know that it was its own thing, the Pirates ride there, but like after you ride it, it's like, this isn't Pirates of the Caribbean, this is a different ride, which is pretty cool. And like, that's probably my favorite ride ever. That's ever been on. So it's just amazing. Just every scene you go to is like, whoa, this is like, there's just these huge set pieces and huge sets that I don't think that any other ride has, even like the big scene in Indiana Jones, like there's like 6 of them in the scenes that size in the Pirates ride in Shanghai. So that was just amazing. We never got to see the animatronic work of Davy Jones, which is pretty sad. But even without that working, it was still, I didn't even know it did work, and I was still impressed. But Shanghai was pretty cool. It was definitely a trip worth the trouble.
And you just look at those showrooms when you're watching it. Like, admittingly, I'm just seeing people showing it on YouTube, but the screens are so high, and they have set pieces in all of the rooms that mesh in with the screens. So it's not just a screen ride, and it's not just a dark water ride. It really mixes the two things so well. I can't imagine the size of that building.
I've never seen it on Google Maps. Now I'm curious to look, but it's just huge. You just don't really you just have it to just your boat for like the section you're in there. So it's just incredible, that ride.
And what is the culture shock going to Shanghai? Because I've seen a lot of people who have gone there, and they've said they're weird things like on Sunday nights, it just empties out because everybody goes for the first half of the day, and then they want to get back home for work. Because of the high-speed rail that they have in China, people can come from very, very far away and just leave Sunday afternoon and be at work on Monday morning.
Yeah.
So it feels like there are times when those parks might be just empty.
Yeah, it was pretty crowded when we went because, again, it had just opened. But there's definitely English was definitely harder to get through just speaking English when we were there. That might have also just been because they just opened, so there was some operational hurdles that haven't been worked out just yet. But there's definitely even just some cultural things. I've never seen people be so flippant to walk in parade routes. I've also never seen people bring in merchandise to sell in a Disney theme park. So there's definitely different cultural things. Also, their Disney Springs, their Disney Town area when we went, completely dead. It was just empty. So there's definitely just some different cultural things for sure with going to Shanghai.
And what did you notice about the other people there and some of these characters where, if you go to Disneyland or you go to Walt Disney World, probably even Disneyland Paris, and people have been seeing these characters since, your grandparents knew Mickey and Minnie. Your parents had, some of these other princesses and some of these other characters, but they're almost introducing people in China to all of these characters because they never had them. It's one of the reasons that they do the modern version of Pirates of the Caribbean, because that's Pirates of the Caribbean to people in China. So did you find that it was interesting that maybe different characters would be popular over there because they just didn't know, Baloo from Jungle Book?
Right, yeah. One of the things I noticed was that that was none of the characters had any lines when we were there. I know that's definitely not the case now because they have all of the Duffy friends, and I hear those can get insane. But I know with the princesses, there was still a lot of people, a lot of little kids dressed up as the princesses, which was still pretty cool. Even if they didn't know what the princess was saying because they didn't speak English, they still were really excited to meet them, which was pretty cool. But like I said, it was weird which characters did have lines and which were popular. Stitch was pretty popular. Winnie the Pooh was pretty popular, especially with everything going on with Winnie the Pooh in China. That was interesting. There wasn't Zootopia just yet, or maybe it just come out, so they didn't have them just yet. Yeah, it was definitely weird to see which characters resonated with people and which didn't. It definitely was different from over here.
It is kind of funny when you say everything going on with Winnie the Pooh over there, that apparently people think that Winnie the Pooh resembles President Xi in China, and President Xi does not like that very much. And
built a whole Winnie the Pooh little mini land. Their teacups is themed to Winnie the Pooh. They have the Winnie the Pooh dark ride. They have a Winnie the Pooh meet and greet, and they invested a lot in Winnie the Pooh for that to come out after.
So I want to get to one last thing before I let you go, and that's as an adult who does do a lot of meet and greets, who focuses on that as a big part of visiting the Disney parks. How do you deal with having all of those interactions and trying to not feel awkward? And do you come up with conversation topics to have with the princesses, with the characters? Do you try to find ways to keep it interesting every time so that you're not feeling awkward? Because I think, as an adult, I never really did the meet and greets until the first time I took my wife to Walt Disney World, and she wanted to meet Snow White and she wanted to meet all these characters. So I never really thought about it as an adult until I started taking her, and now I was trying to find different ways to interact with these characters. How do you find ways to keep those interactions fresh when you do
Sure.
so many of them?
So I think it's beneficial that I'm pretty familiar with all the movies to an extent, or like whatever movie they're from, or a TV show or what have you. So I definitely like try to like ask them a question from it. Character performers love that sort of thing. They like eat it up like candy. So as long as you're respectful within their boundaries and ask something that's appropriate, they'd love to play around with you for a little bit. So I think that's definitely fun. The best place to do that sort of thing is Disneyland, because characters will be everywhere, especially in Fantasyland. And if you have something to ask them or you want to walk with them, they're more than happy to. And that's where you get the best interactions. Definitely is Disneyland for sure.
I know the one time they had just introduced Asha from Wish at Epcot, and I got in line. I'm like, I'm going to meet Asha from Wish. I'm going to tell everybody where they can meet her and try to do this to, promote what's going on here. And then I was second in line and I realized her movie hasn't come out yet.
Right.
I don't know what to discuss with her because I have no idea what's going on there. And, I ended up making a fool of myself, but whatever. That's just par for the course. What is your favorite park for meet and greets? And here's the best last question. What was your favorite rare character that you've ever had the chance to meet?
So I'm definitely gonna say Disneyland. I kind of already talked on it before. Like it's just, you can always see really cool characters at Disneyland. They're always walking around. They're always willing to play and like take pictures, and you can always expect to see a lot, which is really cool. And they just have the best interactions over at Disneyland and the best like selection of characters too. I think the best character the best meet and greet I've ever done was at my dad's service celebration. He's a cast member. He got to go for being there for 25 years. And they had Stitch and Friends meeting over in Stitch's Great Escape, and we got to meet Ruben, the sandwich guy from the TV show. He was really cool. He was like doing the little sandwich stacker thing, and he was really cool. And like a lot of people didn't know his name, so they saw him and would just pass him up. So we were with him for a pretty long time, just chilling out with him. So that's one of my favorite meet and greet for sure.
If people want to follow you on Twitter and see all of these different character interactions that you're having, see pictures from the international parks, why don't you give everybody your handle?
Sure. My Twitter handle is @LEETMOR, Leetmore. And yeah, I tweet probably too much. So feel free to follow me there.
You do tweet quite a bit, but I appreciate it. I always like to see, especially now when social media can be such a downer and covered in so many negatives, to see you posting some really fun, positive content is always great. And thank you so much for joining me on the show.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
This has been episode 166 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. We will be back next Thursday with another brand new episode. Until then, have a great week.